Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be here. That passage from Mesnevi that you discussed a little bit before we stopped for the zikr, that's always it doesn't confuse me, but it raises a lot of questions because it appears that the Arif is the one who understands that God does everything, and because of that, he can essentially just not interfere with God's will. Is that a true? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they have the. It's just very interesting because there are other places in Book 6 that show the futility of thinking that one has agency or power. And if we were to use another example, let's say from Ibn Arabi, then we know that in some of the chapters, like Lot, he explains that, or in Shu'aib and others, he explains that you can see there's this thing about, on the one hand, that the Gnostic is in fact been empowered, but at the same time as the Gnostic is moving through the journey of life, the older he or she gets, then the more there's an understanding that all of the striving and the struggle was because of youthful energy that was very grounded in the nafs. Now remember something, the nafs, in addition to the things I said earlier, the nafs is an insatiable storyteller and story consumer. And in fact, the Quran itself is, in its aspect as nafs, in its aspect as the world and the doings of the world, is very much about story, as the Quran says itself in Qasas and other chapters where God is basically talking about the limitless storytelling. And so the nafs is in that place. And when we're young, we are then accumulating things, are we not? In terms of our knowledge. So we have an inherent nature. And we would not disagree with either evolution or science, or therefore the idea of genes and particular aspects that a person has. It's rather that we just see that whether it's in the human world or the animal world, there's storytelling. Because after all, coyotes do speak to each other, so do wolves, so do birds, so do many other creatures in one way or another. They're part of this element of storytelling. But if we combine that particular selection from the Masnavi with, I guess you could say that one of the poems that occurred to me this morning when I found out that Dawood was 49, and I said, well, the great teacher could be referred to by Hafez, for example, in a particular poem that he has, and I don't know if you had joined us at that point, Zaki, but he says, Nis bar lauhi delam jos alef qamati dus, che konam, harf digar yad nadad ustadam. He says, there's nothing upon the slate of my heart except for the tall stature of the aleph of the friend, you see. So the aleph is the letter, as you know, but as many people may not know, it looks like a number 1. See, Nisbar lauhi delam jos aleph qamati dus. Chekonam, what can I do حرف دیگر یاد نداد استادم because my teacher my ustad has given me no other letter. So what we see there is Hafiz, who is an older man. He has gone through a regression away from knowledge and power to a fundamental condition of the slate of the heart, which can only know the letter Aleph, you see, the letter for one. And so this is very interesting because we could easily think of that short stanza from a poem, one of Hafiz's poem, or really a couple of lines only from one of Hafiz's poem. We could consider how he, with his great knowledge of the Quran, he might easily have linked it with Rana ala qulubihim ma kanu yaksibun. What they have been accumulated has made a verdigris over the heart. You see, so all of the Sufis and all of the people who discover this element of spirit, they would realize that, as they say in so much Persian poetry, that you're going to burn the pile of the harvest. You're going to essentially burn your own harvest because it was really not what you should have been gathering. You should have let God choose for you what is best and so on. But in any case, the whole idea of the religious people interpret that to be like many other verses in the Quran about accumulating sins. But as I pointed out to you, the verb used has the idea of aggregate and addition and so forth. So, Rana ala qulubihim ma kanu yaksibun. We could take another line of Rumi's in that regard, where he says, Jan shanasan az adadha farehand, gharqe daryoyi bichunand u chand. Jan shaw wa az rah jan ra shanas. Yari bine shaw na farzande qiyas. I quote this to you a great deal, and this particular citation, this particular statement of Rumi's, where he's talking specifically about the spirit. So earlier today, we were talking, most of the conversation was about the nature of spirit and the differentiating it from the psyche. Or Faisal John had really asked that, because I'd made a statement that my statement on Friday was, there's in fact a very defined line between spirituality and psychology. And again, that line is what we're talking about now. So in this particular citation, he says that the knowers of spirit, they have drowned in the ocean of without number or measure, meaning an ocean that has no multiplicity. Okay, as adat hafaranat. And the next thing he says is that in that poem is that you should become spirit to learn about the spirit and to be guided by the spirit. You see, and so in that particular poem, he's emphasizing that the only way to know spirit is to become it. And at the end of that poem, he says, become the friend and the follower of vision, not the follower of supposition. So the meaning there is that why vision? Because another thing we could attribute to spirit is light. And what is the first entity that God created? Anyone? What is the first thing God created?
The light of Muhammad?
But in more universal terms. The intellect.
Universal intellect?
The intellect, you see. So the first thing. So this is agreed upon in Islamic literature, and you could say, you could attribute the light of Muhammad to that as well. But let's stick for a moment with the universality of the idea of intellect. So there must have been something simpler prior to creation, and that is called spirit. So if there's something then that starts to bring the story into position and into play, it would be the intellect, meaning the purveyor of knowledge. And so do you see the thing coming back to Zakiuddin's question and comment? If we go back to that poem right now, Rumi's at the end of his own life, and that's one of a number of poems that sort of try to take us along some of the poems he writes earlier that are very sparse early in the Masnavi, because early in the Masnavi we see a great deal about love and passion, but we also see a great deal about doctrine and dogma, and many stories about the nafs and the self and so forth. And all of it is very beautiful, but we do see a maturing and a development in Rumi's own thinking and his own expression, because at an earlier point in the Masnavi and an earlier point in his life, and perhaps your life, you might have thought that you could gain dominion or power, or certainly, speaking for myself, let's say that have something to find, to gain, to possess, to evolve, etc. And then finding out in older age that there are simpler and easier ways to arrive at, in this case, we are talking about ma'rifat, aren't we? Because the poem, he says in there, it's arifan, right? It's the Gnostics, the people who know. So that's very interesting, because the people who know, coming back to Zaki, they are at the river's shore, where the river of spirit is winding around over different terrains, and the knowledge of this is in fact knowledge, more knowledge about the domain of spirit as it pours into the world of form, or the world of the uncreated pouring into the world of the created. The first thing being created here is the intellect, as we know, not just from Islamic thought, but from earlier thought, Neoplatonic thought, etc. So, a bit long-winded of an answer for you, Zaki, but I just want you to understand that he's connecting his vast understanding of philosophy and the meaning of the Quran with the ultimate simplicity of surrender. Because isn't it really taslim, or Islam, that is here being talked about, that one finally just surrenders to things as they are and allows the ultimate doer to do those things, you see? So, are you there, Zaki?
I am. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I can't hear you right now.
Oh,
there we go. you were saying.
Yeah, thank you. No, I understand. Thank you.
Good. And you know this section of the poem, huh? It sounds like you've become friends with it.
I do, and there's a section afterwards about the curtain over the heart. I don't know if that's worth exploring. Yeah.
Well, there's again the whole issue there is again, obviously everyone knows the heart we're talking about here is this door in New York that I was explaining to you about earlier. You see that of all the doors in New York, there is one door that New York's big. That's why I chose it on the Big Apple. And so vastness has a vast number of doors. The ocean has a vast number of waves. But finding that one door simply means relaxing enough or allowing the ocean to settle, and then one realizes the situation condition called unity, and multiplicity was an illusion, you might say. From that vantage point, from the vantage point of nafs and the divine names, why would the divine names be multiple if there wasn't such a case as the need or the desire on the part of being known by God, who expresses such a sentiment? I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known. So this storytelling also starts at that end. And what's different about the storytelling from the intellect is the storytelling is about love and desire. So it's endless, and the pain and the sorrow and the joy and the ecstasy, he uses the verb loved to be known. And when we really ponder, we look at the Quran, and another thing I was saying to Faisal the other day is the Quran, much of it seems to be the confession of a wounded lover, meaning when we look at God's wrath and the rage and the sadness that he expresses with regard to people not seeing the unitary lover, but rather creating idols. He has many divine names, but in fact, they are all like parts of a single body. And so he's basically saying, I want you to know me. I know you, and I want you to know me as I am, and not to invest so much in knowing the limited aspect of yourself. So by reducing everything back to unity, such as in Hafez's line, one now has a mirror that is clear and reflects things as they are. It would be one way we think of the heart. Or the veil has been lifted, so the veil of multiplicity has been lifted. So yes, he's still certainly looking at that element of the veil over the heart. We don't know if he would have gone further had he lived. We don't really know the circumstances of the end of the Masnavi. But he also, in book 6, there's so many other stories, like the person who finds out there's a treasure and has to shoot arrows to find out where they land and dig them up and so on and so forth. And ultimately we find out that the error that person had made was to become too absorbed in the bow and the arrow and the strength of the arm in succeeding at shooting far away. And in fact, he was reprimanded and told, no one said for you to shoot the bow far away. One just said, put the arrow in the bow and let it drop. So it's very interesting story. But in this whole, he has a series of stories Many of them in book 6, some earlier, but that story is very telling, huh? So the one that I was quoting earlier, and you're right, so because it says Arifan, you see, Arifan Azdujahan, the Azdujahan Kahel Tarant. So it's in the plural. The Gnostics, or the knowers, are lazier than anyone else in the two worlds, meaning the manifest and unmanifest of any entity. You see, they are more lazy. Zonke be shudjar Herman mibarat. Because without doing any plowing, they are gathering the harvest, you see. And then he says, Kahili ra karda and ishan sanad, kare ishan ra chun yazdan mikonad. So he's saying it is laziness itself that they have made as their support. The Kohelira, it is laziness itself that they've made their primary support. And when their work, because their work is being carried out by God, you see, so they have a reason to make laziness their fundamental principle, you could say. See, sanat. And then he says, of course, that the difference is when he says, Kore yazdan ra nabi binad om minay asayand Askat Sobosham. So the regarding God's work, Kari Yazdan, the vast majority of people, the public at large, they are unaware of this, and so they are constantly striving and toiling without any rest, you see. So that's what he says. And so it's a very lovely thing. You see, very lovely thing he's saying. So not too long ago, maybe a year ago or so, Mahmoud, our friend Mahmoud, was working on a poem, and he ran into this word kahel, you see, lazy, and we were having conversation because it seemed inappropriate to the place. It was about a saintly woman who would appear to also be lazy, and I pointed out to him, well, Rumi, for him, that's a code word. So lazy means spiritual. Lazy means a surrenderer. Lazy means, so it's not lazy, it's sort of another term, like a Malamati term, almost, you could say. So we do find it here and there in other poems of his, and we find it in other poems in general. And so does anyone else have a question or?
Ustad, Assalamu alaikum, it's Asma from the UK.
Asma, how are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah, how are you?
Good, welcome. Nice to hear your voice. How's everything?
Yeah, good. We're roasting here. Apparently it's the hottest England has ever been, and as you know, when the weather changes here, we go into some kind of national crisis mode, so I'm sure you've had it hotter.
Yeah, it's sad what's happening in Spain and France and England.
Yeah, that's a bit alarming. I'm going to Spain next week, inshallah, and I'm reading that whole area now, the Malaga area and everything they've had flames and fires, but inshallah, Allah khair.
Oh, it's shocking. It's terrible. It's really shocking.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing compared to what you guys have had, but yeah. But my question was just if you're talking about...
Right now, yes.
Yeah, right. The question was if you're talking about striving, I mean, I kind of understand what you're saying, that as you get older, you realize that you might as well have not bothered all along because it was written that way. You definitely see it as you get older. And then there's another idea, which is that obviously qadar is qadar, and that's that. And there's no answer to it. So you can strive, but the result seems to be the same. But once you accept qadar, mashallah, the serenity that comes, I'm just thinking for myself because I'm struggling through personal stuff for quite a while, and then just had, as you said, the door opened. And it was not from any effort of my own, because, I was just going through the emotions and all the rest of it. But alhamdulillah, there does seem to come this point of peace. But anyway, there seems to be a purpose, as you said, for all the journeying and the struggling beforehand. And I mean, I suppose the best example is the example of the Prophet's lives. And also, Imam Ali, they all went through this kind of external struggle that seemed to be a necessity, but in the end, because they were always with Allah and they were always at that point of, I suppose you'd call it tawheed or whatever you would, the recognition that nothing happened without the permission of Allah. So people would say to them, let bits of the heaven fall on us, show us how, and they would say, we've got nothing to do with that. That's Allah's thing. We're just here to deliver the message. The point I'm trying to make is all the striving and emotional turmoil and agonies and whatever, they have to serve a purpose, because even the greatest of mankind went through these things. So, I mean, in the end, surrender is it, but it doesn't. It seems to be by the grace of God. It's not something that you can rationalize it and you can believe in qadar, but when the actual serenity that comes always seems to be from Allah. And I said, even these people who were at their most serene, always interiorly, they were never without that serenity, but they still had to go through. Was that just form to show us, or was it a necessity for the soul, or the body has to go through these things? Or do you get the question? Sorry, I'm rambling a bit.
Yes, well, it's a question that I often like to discuss in the sense that let's take the prophets, for example. The Quran is built upon the teachings of God through his prophets and his choice of individual prophets and his choice of revealing his message through those prophets via the agency of his own angel Gabriel, etc. But so what I always like to point out, it's a great mercy that we as human beings see that the prophets struggled a great deal, and that in fact they had weaknesses and faults. And so from that side of view, I think it is inevitable. Number one, they are human, but number two, it is wisdom for the teaching of human beings that they should see that God has chosen people who do suffer and struggle and make mistakes. That he wants us to know that it is the prophets also who go through this, so that we don't lose hope. And it's in that regard, by the way, but in a different, from a different point of view, that I was sort of bringing this topic to the front, and that is as follows. Many people, they write to me and say to me that I'm doing the zikr, I'm doing it, but I'm not getting anywhere, or I have ups and downs, or I don't know if I will ever get anywhere. So in that context, there's a great deal of energy has been spent on expectation, hearing about what happens to others by practicing the zikr. The zikr being, for example, for our own teacher and many others, sort of the fundamental way that one could directly experience God's presence. But by wanting something, by having an objective, by striving, by worrying about it, etc., that energy it is not actually going to be fruitful. What one finds out ultimately is that what is fruitful is just to say, oh, okay, I get it. I can be, in fact, I can learn from these teachers like Rumi, who says that in fact it was laziness, code word for surrender at a profound level. And there's a bit of humor to it too. I think you'll agree that one has in fact realized one wasn't supposed to be doing all of the work that God was doing, but one was supposed to just be appreciating it and accepting that this is how things go. So whether we're talking about in the big picture, which we were earlier, about one's life and all of the different struggles, and kind of looking at the development of the human being, the child discovering ego, ego discovering possessiveness and seeking power and authority and learning, etc., dominance, attainment. You see, these are very real drivers in not just humans, but certainly very much so in humans as much as other creatures upon this world. And so he's in the case of zikr, understand that it's sufficient to sit and to do nothing, basically. And this is the position, is it not the position of Taoism? Do they not have a doctrine called Wu Wei, non-doing? You see, so when we think of it, it's a beautiful poem. It's technically very important from my point of view. That if people understand that they were not actually supposed to try, they were not really being asked to do any of that, or to attain on some schedule, or to arrive at what are very often, let's call them fancy, beautiful, astounding experiences that people have that we read about or otherwise. None of that is relevant to the individual who is merely there to sit quietly and to just be present. It's sufficient to be present and to not worry that one fell asleep or one had the wrong thoughts or for one forgot how many times they were counting the zikr. None of that would be what would be the key to illumination. So the key to illumination would be to allow one to be illuminated. And of course that is from the spiritual world. Since he blew the luminous spirit into each of us, it's sort of settling down to allow something that happened before we were before, allowing it to appear to us again. And that's where I think that the poem from Hafiz, that you were probably on board, huh? You heard the lovely little...
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
But it's very famous, actually. And so I think this is the thing, is to especially in our times, what will happen even with, say, these fires or with the war in Ukraine or with all of the disasters, Well, it's going to be another bloody story, like, I mean, all of it is going to be ups and downs and heroism and terrorism, and all of it mingled together, as are the divine names. Meanwhile, we have a simple task, which is just to surrender, to do what we can, yes, but it is not about quietism. This is not a doctrine of quietism. This is a doctrine of being reasonable about what is possible, and knowing that the greatest treasure was given long before we were ourselves. It was not born. It will not die. So to simply sit, knowing that who is sitting is that which was born. Who is waiting very often is that which was born. Who is wanting, who is striving. And this essential and most important element is outside of that, you see? So that's why Rumi also says, as kufr was Islam birun sahrayist, mara ba miyan an faza saudayist, arab chun badan rasid sara binehad, na kufr na Islam na unja jayist. You maybe know this poem, huh? Rumi is actually being difficult or controversial for many people in this poem, because he's saying, to start with, as kufr o Islam birun sarayist, says outside of infidelity and Islam and the religion, outside of that, he says there's a vast plain. As kufr o Islam birun sarayist, mara ba miyan an faza saudayist. There is a sweet ecstasy waiting for us over there. See, in that vast place. Mara ba miyan an faza saudayist. Arif. Now remember, the last poem was about the Arif, wasn't it? There's Arif chun badan rasid sara binehad. When the Arif or Arifa, obviously he means men or women, huh? So when the Arif reaches that place, that is where they bow their head, presumably in sajda. But in the ultimate sajda, isn't it a surrender? Of course it is, you see. So, na kufr na Islam na unja jayis. So there's neither fidelity or religion there where there is not even a place. You see, it's very beautiful quatrain, very famous one, sort of played around a lot with by Coleman Barks and other Western translators. So that, in fact, is a good little quatrain to keep in one's mind, and to understand that he's not trying to insult the religion or anything like that. He's in fact trying to increase what we understand. So, yeah, so that would be my reply to you.